everybody, Infinite Shinjo here, and welcome back to another one of my top 10s. Throughout the course of this year so far, I realized that the only top 10s that I made were based off of openings. While I did like making those videos, it's not really accurate because a show could have a very catchy anime opening, but the show itself could be complete and utter garbage. I'm not thinking of any anime in particular when I'm saying that, but if you are, I don't know. But looking back, I realized that I never made a top 10 anime shows list. That might be because I didn't watch enough anime to fill 10 slots before, or it could be that I just forgot. But regardless, today I am here to bring you my top 10 anime shows list. Now, before I get into this list, there are a couple of rules that I'm going by to make it so the list isn't so one-sided and unfair. The first rule that I'm using is I am only allowing anime that I have finished on this list. So any anime that I'm watching from this season will not be on this list. The second rule is that I am not putting any shows that have a continuation like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon, because they have different little spin-offs with Ash going to different regions and a different Yu-Gi-Oh! Protagonist happening every 4 to 5 years roughly. And third and most importantly of all, I am only using shows that are finished in their entirety as far as I know. And just to give a little background, I am recording the audio for this on March 11th of 2018. So, needless to say, Dragon Ball Super is not going to be on this list because it is not finished at this point. Dragon Ball Super will likely be finished by the time that I upload this, but that would mean that I would have to redo this whole audio, and I don't really feel like doing that. So, without further ado, let's get into my top 10 anime shows list. And before I begin, let me just say that this is entirely my opinion. It's totally okay for you to disagree with anything that's on this list, because we both have differing opinions, I'm sure. Number 10 on my list is Chosoku Henkai Gyrozetter. So to give a little background on this, it was probably sometime last year when I was on my previous channel and somebody mentioned that I should watch this show. Now, I was a little apprehensive about watching it after finding out it had 52 episodes, I believe, but I decided to watch the first couple of episodes to see what it basically is about. Now, I'll be honest, I wasn't really keen on the whole cars transforming into robots side of the story at first, because that kind of stuff never really interested me, but I liked the show. Not only did it have fight scenes involving the Gyrozetters, but it also had episodes that dedicated to the relationships between all the characters as well. Later on in the story, when the time traveling came into the story, it was a little bit confusing for me because I've never really watched time traveling shows, but the plot was still nice. Considering that this show took two different ideas, mechas and time traveling, and put them together and still made it a decent show for me to watch, that's very commendable, and that's why it's number 10 on this list. Number 9 on my list is One Punch Man. Now, if for some reason you haven't heard of this show, watch it. While on the surface it seems like it's just a fighting show, it is a very nice parody as well. Actually, I think that's one of the genres that they put One Punch Man in on various sites. One reason that I like One Punch Man, and Saitama by extension, is the kind of a protagonist that he is. What I mean by that is, up until I watched One Punch Man, every other anime that I've been watching has been basically Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon. With Pokemon, it's always Ash, that kind of little bit cocky, little bit smart depending on generation, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Well, they change the protagonist around all the time. But what I like about Saitama is, while he is the strongest in the world according to the show, he doesn't let it get to his head. He's just going through everyday life, and honestly a lot of the time when he gets into fights, it isn't because he wants to, it's because something or somebody provokes him. while it does sound like I'm singing the praises of the show, it doesn't come without its set of flaws as well. Outside of the fact that it's trying to be a parody, the story doesn't really get interesting until halfway through season 1. And the first season is only 12 episodes. And I know that everybody is just waiting for One Punch Man season 2. There is no announcement of that, as far as I know, yet. So that is why it's on my list. At number 9. Number 8 on my list is Haven't You Heard, I'm Sakamoto. What's interesting about this show is I didn't watch it of my own volition. I was just hanging out with a friend from high school one day, and he said, oh yeah, you should watch this show, Sakamoto, and showed me a little clip of the first few minutes of the show, and I decided to watch it. I did hear a little bit about the show before I watched it though, mainly because of Nate Wants to Battle's cover of the opening. But other than that, I didn't know anything about the show. But for people like me who haven't heard much of what the show is about, fortunately they tell you what it's about at the start of every single episode. But the reason that I like Sakamoto, the show, and the character is, like Saitama, he is a bit of a change in anime protagonists because he doesn't go out of his way to find trouble. He's just sitting there minding his own business and people come over to him and start looking for a fight. Now, I will admit that this show is a bit iffy for me because the way that I'm ranking these shows is one part how much I enjoyed the show in general and one part how much it pulled on my heartstrings. But the thing with this show is it establishes Sakamoto as somebody who's just perfect in anything and everything that he does. And even when people are trying to cause him trouble, he eventually gets out of it unscathed anyway. So it doesn't really present much danger with the show because you know that Sakamoto is going to get out of it regardless. But even with that, I did still enjoy the show, and I like how the last couple of episodes of Sakamoto decided to focus on a character arc for a few of the characters that are involved in the show. But all of that is why Sakamoto is at number 8 on my list. Number 7 is Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid. Now, this was another one of the anime that I watched very early on when I decided to start watching more and more anime that isn't Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon back early last year. The things that I like about Dragon Maid is it's very funny. There were at least a couple of times I was genuinely laughing at what was happening. But the show also does have some heartwarming moments. The most recent episode of the OVA that I watched is coming to mind right now. But one thing I like about Dragon Maid is that it shows Toru in the first episode, and then a few episodes later it shows Kana, and then the other characters, and it makes it so it can stay fresh and still introduce brand new characters that you can either love or hate. One moment that I like that for me is a standout moment of the show is one episode Toru is walking out in public and she basically has an inner conflict about why she's staying with Miss Kobayashi. I can't remember what episode number it is, but I'm sure that I will find it and I will correct myself while I'm editing this video so you'll know what episode that I'm talking about. But all of that is why Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid is number 7 on my list. Number 6 on my list is Baku and Test. Now, I know I've mentioned this a few other times already, but Baku and Test was the first anime that I watched outside of the original 4 that everybody always mentions: Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Digimon, and Dragon Ball Z. It was a very enjoyable ride for me. The plot was very cool. It took the already existing school genre and kind of mixed it up a little bit. I just love how all of the main cast in Baku and Test, their personalities just bounce off of each other so perfectly, and it really seems like they're one big quirky family. And they couldn't have picked a better protagonist than Akihisa Yoshi. While Akihisa does seem like the character that you really shouldn't take seriously just because they always call him the idiot of the class, he does have some redeemable moments during the show, even if he's just supposed to be a joke character. One thing that I will say about it is the show does kind of end on a cliffhanger with the love triangle between Akahisa and the two lead girls. Now, normally I'm not the biggest fan of romance in a cartoon, but it just seems weird that they would bring it up and kind of leave it open-ended. But regardless, it was still a fun ride. Even the side characters in the show all were shown to have some bit of personality, and that is why Baku and Test is number 6 on my list. Number 5 on my list is actually 2 shows. Even if it is technically one show at the same time, it is Clannad and Clannad After Story. Now, I know that there are people that either absolutely love or absolutely hate the show. And for me, well, I guess you can figure that out since it's on my list. But what I love about Clannad is it introduces all these characters, the main characters, the side characters, and takes that time to give each one of them that little bit of personality to make it so we can relate to them on some level. Clannad takes these characters that, in some weird way, do end up getting along with each other, or at least tolerating each other, and I just love how those relationships build over the course of the show. And don't even get me started on Clannad After Story. I'm not going to say anything about it because I don't want to spoil it for anybody that hasn't seen anything from Clannad, but it's a very emotional ride. That's all I'm going to say. Those relationships, memories, and life lessons are why Clannad and Clannad After Story are number 5 on my list. Number 4 on my list is Lucky Star. Now, in some weird way, I can see parallels between Lucky Star and Clannad. The basis of Lucky Star is that it's 5 girls just hanging out day-to-day life in high school, I believe it is. But with Clannad, they have these characters that build their relationships over the course of the show. Lucky Star is different from this because the relationships between all the main girls are already established at the point the show begins, and they're just shown throughout the show's run. But I gotta be honest for a little bit. I wasn't sure about Lucky Star when I watched the first episode, because the first episode is basically the main girls talking about what way to eat a cornet, which I believe in Japan is basically some sort of croissant filled with some sort of cream or whatever. But while I was watching the first episode, I was just sitting there thinking, am I watching a show that takes 10 minutes out of it to talk about which side to eat a cornet so that way the cream doesn't fall out? But I decided to give it a couple more episodes, and I'm glad that I did, because it's one of those shows that you don't really watch for the plot. It's one of those shows that you just watch just to unwind after a rough day. Lucky Star is just a free-spirited show that is just 5 girls hanging out, and that is why Lucky Star is number 4 on my list. Number 3 is Servant X Service. Now, this is the most recent anime that I finished out of all these ones on my list. I think I finished it a couple of weeks ago while I was considering putting Servant X Service and New Game on this list in the exact same spot because they have very close similarities. I decided to pick Servant X Service because I already talked about New Game in my top 10 anime openings list. But this show shows the main character, Lucy, basically adapting to her new job. And one thing I love about it, in one of the first few episodes, they basically come out and say, our job is just for people to yell at us. I know that I'm probably not saying that word for word, just paraphrasing it, but that's basically what they said. Kind of like with Baku and Test, I like how the show takes all these different characters' quirky personalities and just have them bounce off of each other and make them seem like some sort of dysfunctional family. Now, if you've watched this show, then you know that near the end of it, they have a bit of a romance plot for Lucy. And like I said in Baku and Test's spot, I'm not the biggest fan of romance plots, but just the fact that all the other aspects of the show are just super upbeat is why it's number 3 on my list. Number 2 on my list is Heniko Note. Now, to give a brief synopsis of what Heniko Note is about, is the main character, Heniko, moves to basically try and be an actor. The place that she used to live, I'm sorry, I can't help but laughing while I'm saying this. Her job was being a scarecrow. I'm not lying to you when I'm saying that. Her job was basically a scarecrow, because Hiniko's main trait is that she cannot talk to people. The instant that somebody approaches her and tries talking to her, her hands stick up on her side, and she basically looks like a scarecrow. And for some unknown reason, all the animals just are attracted to her. They never really explain it during the show, but I guess they didn't really feel the need to. After Heniko moves to try and perform on stage, she basically ends up living in a hotel with a bunch of other girls, and in order to stay there, she has to get a job, and that's basically the plot of the show. The reason that Heniko Note is number 2 on my list is because I relate to Heniko so much. Because I couldn't talk to people that I didn't know for the longest time in middle and high school. And I even took a couple of acting classes to try and get over that as well. Now, one thing that I will say about the show is it kind of deceived me a couple of times. What I mean is, there were a couple of times that I thought that this is going to be how the show ends, but it doesn't. One example I can think of off the top of my head is in episode 10, Hiniko's mother is coming to visit and is going to see her perform on stage. I saw this and I was thinking, okay, episode 10, they could easily stretch this out 2 more episodes and have the finale be Heniko showing her mom that she can perform on stage, and she has grown since she moved out. But that plot only lasted 1 episode, maybe half of an episode. Instead, the season finale is the girls just off having some fun. Even if the show did trick me a couple of times into when I thought it was going to end, I still enjoyed the show nevertheless because of how much I could see myself in Heniko, and that is why it's number 2 on my list. Number 1 on my list is Gakkogurashi, or School Live. Now, I know that I already talked about this show in my first episode of Let's Talk Anime, but I just can't help but not talk about this show. I don't think there are enough hours in the day for me to explain what I love about this show. I love how it shows the personalities of the 4 main girls and fleshes them out and sees how they were before they met the others and after. It's a very interesting story. I'm going to say the exact same thing that I said when I talked about this show before. I'm not going to mention what the spoiler of this show is. I'm just going to call it the threat. That threat is constantly looming over the entire group, and you're just sitting there through each episode wondering what's going to happen this episode because of that threat always being there. I love the last few episodes of the show as well. It really shows how much each character has grown throughout the 12 episodes. I know the last episode has very mixed opinions, but I liked it. It makes sense considering the context of what they explain during the whole show. And I know other people might disagree with me on that, but I like the show. In case it wasn't obvious already, since this is my second time talking about this show over a 3-month period, that is a bit of a sign that this show is good. And one thing that I can think about comparing Gakkogurashi to is Clannad. Now, while the plots of the show are very different, it has a group of characters, and it has some very heartwarming moments, and moments that you just can't help but cry. But the reason that Gakkogurashi is number 1 on my list is while Clannad was able to accomplish the same thing, it took them roughly 26 episodes to do that, where with Gakkogurashi, they were able to do that in only 12 episodes. That in itself is a very impressive feat, if I do say so myself. And that is why Gakkogurashi is number 1 on my list. Thank you so much for watching my top 10 anime shows list. What do you think about my list? Do you think that I should have switched the order of a couple of the shows on this list? What are your top 10 favorite anime shows? Let me know all of that in the comment section below. And as well, I would encourage that if any of these shows interest you in any way and you haven't watched them yet, I would highly recommend watching them, because there's a reason that I put them on my list. They're all just that great, in my opinion, that I would recommend them to anybody else in a heartbeat. Again, thank you for watching my top 10 anime shows list, and I will see you in the next video. Have an awesome day, everybody!